Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. On this week's video, we're in our fourth and final session of our new and ongoing series entitled The All-Time, Hands Down Best QME Report Ever. And in today's session, I want to bring full circle all of the codes of regulation and labor codes that we've been talking about throughout the course of this particular program. And I want to share with you in today's session how to conclude the discussion section of your report with a fabulous argument, a fabulous ironclad substantial medical evidence opinion argument on your apportionment approximate percentages. So qualified medical evaluators tell me that the apportionment determination is the most difficult section that they face within the entirety of their QME evaluation. It seems that QMEs struggle with coming up with accurate and substantial apportionment approximate percentages. Well, in today's session, I have the exact solution for you, one of which, if you follow this step-by-step sequence I'm going to share with you in today's discussion, this sequence will lead you naturally, correctly, and accurately to the perfectly correct apportionment approximate percentages for those examinees who you determine have a permanent impairment as a result of their industrial injury. So this is going to be a great session for you, and I'm going to make it very simple in this brief, less than 1 hour discussion. But before we get to the topics of today's discussion, let's just briefly review where we've come from so far and summarize the program up to this point in time. In session number 1, we had a fascinating session entitled Verisimilitude in the QME report. And if you've not had a chance to see this particular video discussion, I suggest that you go back and take a look at this particular session, because it's a very important discussion about how to create the appearance of truth and reality in your QME report writing. And the appearance of truth and the appearance of reality throughout the pages of your QME report are based upon the details, the accuracy and the exacting details that you provide within the pages of your QME report. And then in session 2, we talked about what kind of details, what are the kind of details that lend truth, accuracy, and the appearance of reality in your QME report. And we talked about the details that are related to the labor codes and codes of regulation. And we entitled our next 2 sessions and even today's session as the paint by the numbers report. And when we talk about numbers, we're talking about the numbers of the codes of regulation and the labor codes that govern the various aspects of the QME evaluation, from the scheduling of the appointment to the face-to-face evaluation to the writing of the report to the submission of the report. There are a few select labor codes and a few select codes of regulation that, if you follow the principles of these particular laws, these laws will lead you to the production of a high quality, highly detailed, highly specific, highly accurate, highly substantial finished product QME report, of which you can be very proud to put your signature on. So we went over all of these in our first session. Many labor codes and codes of regulation, including Labor Code 4628, CCR 35.5B, and CCR 34B. We spent quite a bit of time talking about the disclosure requirements under CCR 40. And if you've not taken a look at CCR 40 and what it has to say about what it is that we're required to discuss with our examinee before we begin our face-to-face evaluation, I encourage you to do it now, because this is an area where the DWC is going to be targeting qualified medical evaluators to ensure that this process actually gets completed with each and every examinee. And it's a very powerful procedure. I've spoken on this at great length in other programs, and I just encourage you now at this juncture to investigate CCR 40 and begin to comply with what it requires us to do. We talked about Labor Code 4062.3, CCR 41, and 10682 in dealing with our review of records. And then we talked at great length about CCR 35.5, and again, this is another very, very important component of your final finished product QME report, and that is your ability here under CCR 35.5 to answer the questions that the parties request of you in their issue cover letters. You know, the whole purpose of your report, the whole purpose of hiring you as the qualified medical evaluator, the whole reason for having you even meet with the injured worker is so that you can answer some questions. The parties have some unanswered questions for which they hire you to provide those answers to the parties. And the parties give us the questions to which they seek answers in their issue cover letters. So there's an art and a science to exactly answering the questions that the parties pose to us in their issue cover letters. And it's required of us to do that under CCR 35.5. And we talked about that at great length in this particular session. So that was session number 2, and then we went on to session number 3. And then in session number 3, we continued talking about more codes of regulation, specifically how to use the interpreter modifier, the -93 modifier, and how to especially get paid for your use of this modifier. And I provided some exacting language that you can use in the body of your report. We talked about the requirements for face-to-face time under CCR 49. We talked about a prepared statement that you can install into your report to describe to the parties how many pages of medical records you expect to be reimbursed for. And this prepared statement exactly fits the bill for that particular purpose. And then we spent some time about how to fashion your argument as to whether or not the examinee is permanent and stationary. Number 1, that was the first thing we talked about. Whether the examinee is or is not permanent and stationary. And then number 2, if you determine that the examinee is permanent and stationary, you're then required to tell us what was the permanent and stationary date. And I gave you some language that you can install into your report as to how to report on both of those issues, to report that the examinee is or is not permanent and stationary, and also to tell us what is the permanent and stationary date. And I gave you some language as to how you can support both of those opinions. Every permanent and stationary argument that you offer in the body of your report contains 4 components. Whether or not the examinee is permanent and stationary or not. Number 2, your reason for why the examinee either is or is not permanent and stationary. So that's the first 2 components. Third component is the date of the permanent and stationary date. And then number 4 is your reasoning as to why that is the appropriate and accurate date of the permanent and stationary condition. And I gave you the entirety of that language that you can use word for word as a template within the body of your report in session number 3. Okay? So that brings us to today's session. And in today's session, we're going to bring this all-time, hands-down best QME report ever project full circle and to closure with perhaps the most difficult section that faces qualified medical evaluators today, and the section from which qualified medical evaluators most shrink is the apportionment section of the report. But I'm here to share with you that your apportionment determination need not be difficult at all. In fact, the labor codes that deal with apportionment, Labor Code 4663 and 4664, give us some exact instruction as to how to fashion our apportionment argument. And I'm going to share with you exactly how to do that today. So we're going to talk in today's session about Labor Codes 4663 and 4664. And we're going to take the language in those labor codes and we're going to marry those with the language described in the Escobedo versus Marshall case. Okay, Escobedo was an en banc decision that dramatically changed how we construct our opinion on the apportionment approximate percentages. So we're going to take the findings of the Escobedo decision, and we're going to take the language of labor codes 46, 63, and 64 and bring them together within the body of our report to create an argument that's a substantial medical evidence opinion argument for your apportionment approximate percentages. And then finally, in the last moments of today's discussion, we'll spend just a brief time, because it's necessary, we'll spend just a brief time talking about Labor Code 139.2 and CCR 10683 and talk about how the Division of Workers' Compensation deals with reports that do not meet minimum standards. In other words, reports that do not follow all of these numbers that we're talking about in this program, that don't follow the labor codes, that don't follow the codes of regulation, that don't rise to even minimum standards. The division has a program and a process for dealing with such reports, and I'll share that with you in the hopes that none of our reports ever end up in that bin of reports that the Division of Workers' Compensation then has to review and issue disciplinary notices to us. So we'll spend just a brief time on that particular topic. So I have a fascinating discussion for you today on apportionment, and I'm certain that this is going to completely transform your current thinking about apportionment, and it's going to make rendering your apportionment approximate percentages much, much easier for you, and something that, rather than hating, you'll actually start looking forward to completing this section within the body of your report. So with that as our introduction, let's begin today's program, which is session number 4 of our new program entitled the All-Time Best, Hands Down, Best QME Report Ever. Okay, so let's begin. And in order to understand how to fashion your apportionment argument within the body of your report, there's a few basic foundational principles that you need to have an excellent grasp of. And one of those principles has to deal with the Escobedo decision. Now, the Escobedo decision gives us our formula for constructing our apportionment argument within the body of our report, and it gives us our instruction for fashioning a substantial apportionment opinion. Now, a substantial apportionment opinion is different from an apportionment opinion. An apportionment opinion, where you include the approximate percentage of the impairment due to the industrial injury and an approximate percentage due to other factors, is a non-substantial conclusory opinion. In other words, your determination of the percentages is the conclusory portion of your opinion. You then take that opinion and elevate it to the high ideal of a substantial opinion by following the formula that was delineated in the Escobedo decision. So let's go through that specific formula, and you're going to see exactly how and what components your apportionment argument needs to contain in order to qualify as a substantial opinion upon which the case can be resolved. So in Escobedo, the court tells us that an opinion on the causation of the apportionment of permanent impairment, the apportionment of the permanent impairment based on causation, number one, must be framed, the opinion must be framed in terms of reasonable medical probability. So what does this tell us? This tells us that when we provide our apportionment approximate percentages, we always use the phrase within reasonable medical probability. You frame your opinion in terms of reasonable medical probability. So you would say, in my opinion, comma, within reasonable medical probability, comma, 80% of the permanent impairment is due to the industrial injury, and 20% is due to other factors, period. So you've now framed your opinion in terms of reasonable medical probability. That's step number one, established for us as a recipe in the Escobedo versus Marshall's decision. Okay, step number two is that your opinion must be based on pertinent facts. Now you're starting to see how this concoction of our apportionment argument is going to start to unfold. You would start your opinion by saying, in my opinion, within reasonable medical probability, 80-20, period. The pertinent facts upon which I rely to come to this determination include, and then there you would give us a listing of your pertinent facts. Number 3, the opinion must be based on an adequate examination and on an adequate history. And this is very, very important for you as qualified medical evaluators to ensure that you do obtain an adequate examination and that you do obtain an accurate history, because this is one of the areas where one or more of the attorneys are going to target your apportionment opinion as an insubstantial, a not substantial opinion, by demonstrating that you don't have adequate examination findings upon which to make your determination, or you don't have adequate history, facts from the history upon which to base your apportionment approximate percentages. So this is an area where we as qualified medical evaluators need to improve our history taking skills and improve our physical examination skills such that we can obtain the data, the facts necessary to provide an accurate apportionment determination. Number 4, it must set forth the reasoning in support of its conclusions. So you might say something like this in the body of your report. You might say, reasons for this conclusion include, and then give us a list of reasons as to why you conclude that 80% is due to the industrial injury, and give us a list of reasons as to why you conclude that 20% are due to other factors, and give us the list of your reasons. Finally, number 5, the opinion on the apportionment approximate percentages must not be speculative. It must not be based on speculation, guess, surmise, or conjecture. And this is something that you can use to test yourself. After you provide your apportionment approximate percentages, you simply ask yourself, is there any part of this opinion that's speculative? Is there any part of this opinion where I'm guessing? And if the answer to those questions is yes, you then go back and rework your apportionment argument to remove all aspects of speculation, guess, conjecture, surmise, or conjecture from your particular opinion. So this is our formula for fashioning our argument, and I'll show you exactly how to do that in just a few minutes. So this gives us a step A foundation for our apportionment determination. Let's now take a look and marry this language from Escobedo with the language of Labor Codes 4663 and 4664 to arrive at the perfect apportionment determination. So under both Labor Codes 4663 and 4664, when it comes time to provide your apportionment approximate percentages, you're going to be providing a percentage of impairment that's due directly to the industrial injury, and you're going to be providing a percentage, an approximate percentage, of the impairment or disability due to other factors. So what are some of the other factors that we need to consider under Labor Code 4663 and 4664? Well, again, we turn to the Escobedo decision, which gives us a list of some of the other factors that we need to consider when we're coming up with our approximate percentage due to factors other than the industrial injury. So one of the things that we need to consider is, does the examinee have any pre-existing disability? Does the examinee have any disability caused by the natural progression of a pre-existing disease or other condition? And you can see that many examinees have pre-existing diseases, pre-existing conditions. Perhaps those pre-existing conditions are contributing or causing some of the examinee's current level of impairment. If so, you need to provide us with that approximate percentage such that the employer is not liable for that portion of the examinee's impairment and or disability. Other factors include pathology, asymptomatic prior conditions. How many examinees have asymptomatic prior conditions? We all do, don't we? Don't we all have conditions in our body that may even be asymptomatic at the current time, but that can be lit up, exacerbated, or aggravated by the industrial injury, and that condition can fail to return to pre-injury condition and can leave the examinee with some level of permanent impairment? Well, the employer under Labor Code 4663 and 4664 is not liable for that percentage of the impairment. They're only liable for the percentage of the impairment or disability that's directly due to the industrial injury. So this is something that you need to give great consideration to, is asymptomatic prior conditions. Finally, another consideration described by Escobedo as retroactive prophylactic work restrictions, where you look at the examinee today and you look back and you determine that in the past they should have had these specific types of work restrictions, the retroactive work restrictions, to prevent a worsening of their condition. This is again another consideration that is apportionable, that restricts the employer's liability only to the percentage of impairment that's due directly to the industrial injury. And under Labor Code 4663 specifically, we're asked to assign an approximate percentage for each of these contributing factors, and I'm going to show you how to demonstrate within the body of your report to the reader of your report that you considered each and every one of these factors in arriving at your final apportionment approximate percentages. Okay, so let's now take a look in greater detail at Labor Code 4663. Okay, and let's go through the language of 4663 and 4664 very painstakingly, because the Labor Code itself gives us great instruction as to how to fashion our apportionment argument within the body of our report. So reading from Labor Code 4663, it tells us that a physician who prepares a report addressing the issue of permanent disability due to a claimed industrial injury shall address in that report the issue of causation of the permanent disability. And for our purposes, we can use the term impairment interchangeably here with the term disability. Okay, so some key points now about this particular section of Labor Code 4663 is that the use of the word here shall is mandatory. So in those cases where you provide an opinion that the examinee has some permanent impairment, we're going to use the term impairment here in place of the term disability. If you determine that the examinee has permanent impairment, then it's mandatory that you address the issue of the causation of that permanent disability. It's required by law. The law is Labor Code 4663. Now the term causation here refers to the causes of the impairment or the disability at the time of the permanent and stationary evaluation, the permanent impairment evaluation that you conducted. So we have an examinee that has an impairment, say of the shoulder, say of the lumbar spine, or say of the psychologic system or any internal system. They have an impairment. Your job is to tell us what are the causes of that impairment or that disability. If there's only one cause, if it's solely due to the industrial injury, there's only one cause, then your apportionment approximate percentages would be 100% to the industrial injury and 0% to other factors. And you're demonstrating to the parties that there's only one cause. Well, if there's multiple causes or multiple contributors to that impairment or disability, you need to tell us what is the percentage due to each factor. And in the end, the employer is only going to be responsible for the percentage directly due to the industrial injury. So that's point number 2. Causation means causes. And then number 3, for our purposes, the term permanent disability is synonymous with the term permanent impairment. And some parties may disagree that in the system, in the workers' compensation system, disability is not synonymous with impairment, but I'm going to contend to you that for our purposes, in terms of our apportionment, approximate percentages, for our purposes, these terms are synonymous, and you can use them interchangeably, at least as relates to your apportionment approximate percentages. Okay, so that's section B of Labor Code 4663. Let's continue and see what the remainder of this particular apportionment law has to say. Okay, so let's continue with Labor Code 4663. It tells us that in order for a physician's report to be considered complete on the issue of permanent impairment or disability, the report must include an apportionment determination, even if your apportionment determination is simply 100% due to the industrial injury and 0% due to other factors. Even if you consider that there's only one cause of the final permanent impairment or disability, you must give us your determination of those particular percentages, which would be in this case 100 and 0. So you cannot simply provide a permanent impairment rating for your examinee and skip the apportionment determination, because that qualifies as an incomplete report, an incomplete description of the permanent impairment or disability. Now, here's a key phrase within Labor Code 4663. It tells us, a physician shall make an apportionment determination by finding what approximate percentage of the permanent disability was caused by the direct result of injury arising out of and occurring in the course of employment, and what approximate percentage of the permanent disability was caused by other factors such as pathology, asymptomatic prior conditions, pre-existing disability, prior disability, retroactive prophylactic work restrictions, okay? Other factors, both before and subsequent to the industrial injury, including prior industrial injuries. Isn't that fascinating? So, a couple key points here from this section of Labor Code 4663. Number 1 is that the law allows us, Labor Code 4663 is the law. The law allows us to employ approximate percentages. We don't have to provide exact percentages. In fact, how could you be exact in your apportionment determination? There's no way to exactly be exact. And legislatures understood this and recognized this, and they incorporated this language within the law, which allows us to use approximate percentages. So in the body of your report, you describe your apportionment percentages by saying, in my opinion, approximately 80% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury, and approximately 20% is due to other factors. Okay, so the law allows for approximate percentages. Now, what's curious and interesting about this is that even though the law allows us to approximate our percentages, we still need to give an exact percentage number. So by that I mean you phrase your apportionment approximate percentages by saying in the body of your report, approximately 80% is due to the industrial injury. And with this phrase, you approximate the exact number being 80, okay? Now, I used to do this differently. I concluded that because we're allowed to approximate our percentages, I used to give a range. I used to say approximately 50 to 60% is due to the industrial injury, and I considered that range to be the approximate range, but the system can't work with ranges. The system works with exact numbers, but we phrase our exact numbers in terms of approximate percentages. So very, very interesting that the law allows us to approximate, because it's impossible to come up with exact percentages. And then final fascinating thing about Labor Code 4663 is that the law here requires us and demands that we consider prior industrial injuries in our apportionment determination. Now, notice here that it does not say prior sports injuries. It does not say prior automobile accident injuries. It does not say prior slip and fall injuries. It does not say prior birth injuries. It does not say prior domestic injuries. It specifically refers to prior industrial injuries. And this gives us a great clue as to the philosophy operative at the time of the passage of this particular labor code, which was back in 2004 when legislators were desperately trying to control the runaway costs of workers' compensation. And this is one way that they attempted to do that, by asking us to take a good hard look at those examinees who we are evaluating for an industrial injury, who have had a prior industrial injury to the same body part. They're asking us to reduce the percentage of the final impairment such that the employer is only liable for the percentage of permanent impairment directly due to the industrial injury arising out of and occurring in the course of employment, and asking us to apportion out any impairment that may have been due to a prior industrial injury. So this is something that we're going to consider when we fashion our apportionment argument. Okay? So there's Labor Code 4663. Let's now take a look at and see what Labor Code 4664 has to say about apportionment. Okay, so very interesting now. Under Escobedo, we have a small list of other factors that we need to consider in our apportionment determination. And Labor Code 4663 gives us an additional factor to consider, and that has to deal with prior industrial injuries. So we have this growing list by law, by number one, case law, which was described in the Escobedo decision, and then actual law under 4663, this list of factors that we need to consider sequentially within the body of our report in coming up with a substantial opinion on the apportionment approximate percentages. And then we have Labor Code 4664, which is our other apportionment law. And this labor code is new. When I say new, this was adopted into law under Senate Bill 899 back in 2004. Many of you were around then. I was around then, and I saw this whole apportionment scheme change in large part due to this new law, Labor Code 4664. And this has to deal with examinees who have a permanent impairment. Okay, at the permanent and stationary date, they have a residual permanent impairment, but they've already received, for another industrial injury, a prior industrial injury, they've already received a permanent disability award. Now, the language is specific for permanent disability award. This does not apply to examinees who have had a prior industrial injury, but their case is resolved by compromise and release. The language in Labor Code 4664 is specific for a prior permanent disability award. It says that the employer shall only be liable for the percentage of permanent disability directly caused by the injury arising out of and occurring in the course of employment, and that's duplicative language from 4663. So that's established again here in 4664, which then goes on to tell us that if the applicant has received a prior award of permanent disability, this does not apply to a compromise and release. Okay, this is an important distinction for you to understand. This applies only to those examinees who have resolved their case through the permanent disability award pathway. It does not apply to examinees who have resolved their case through the compromise and release pathway. It says, it shall be conclusively presumed It's a conclusive presumption that the prior permanent disability exists at the time of any subsequent injury, including this particular industrial injury for which you are evaluating the injured worker. This industrial injury that you're evaluating is a subsequent industrial injury. So the law tells us that at the time this examinee suffered the subsequent industrial injury, the permanent disability that they had due to the prior industrial injury exists in all its aspects at the time of the subsequent industrial injury. So what does this mean? This means at the time that the examinee suffered the subsequent industrial injury, by law, they were already damaged goods. They already had a permanent impairment. They already had pain. They already had limitations to activities of daily living. They already had a prior permanent impairment and or disability. So therefore, by law, under Labor Code 4664, the employer is only liable for the portion of the impairment that's above and beyond that which existed already by law at the time of the subsequent industrial injury. So the employer is only responsible for the worsening above and beyond an already bad condition, whether it be a bad knee condition, a bad back condition, whatever. The prior permanent disability exists in all its forms, in all its aspects. The examinee already had reduced range of motion. The examinee already had atrophy. The examinee already had loss of strength. Whatever the prior permanent disability was upon which they received a permanent disability award, whatever it was, still exists today at the time of the subsequent industrial injury. And again, this was a way that Senate Bill 899 attempted to reduce skyrocketing costs in workers' compensation. So we now have three factors, three components that are going to contribute to our apportionment approximate percentages. We have the Escobedo decision, we have Labor Code 4663 and 4664, and we have these general principles that are sprinkled throughout each of these three considerations. Let's now see how this can be integrated within the body of our report. Okay, so how can we do this within the body of our report? Well, here, as we go through an actual report template, you're going to see several of these principles that we've talked about starting to come together to contribute to a high quality and substantial report. And specifically here, we're talking about the apportionment approximate percentages. So here we're in the apportionment section of our report. We're talking about the apportionment of the permanent impairment, where we're going to detail to the parties the particular causes of the current impairment. So we start this section of our report by including here the questions that come from the parties in the issue cover letters. This is in accordance with CCR 35.5B, where we're required to answer each of the questions posed by each of the parties in their issue cover letters. So here you would simply say the January 1st, 2022 cover letter from Attorney Smith requests, and then here underneath you would put the question right here. This is the first apportionment question that the attorney asks. You would ask that, you would place that question here within this section of your report. You would repeat that process for the other attorney, and then here you would provide us with your answers to those questions. And typically your answer is going to include your apportionment approximate percentages. So you start to give us your formulation of the permanent impairment as follows. Now, here's a recommended sequence that's going to incorporate what we've learned so far regarding Escobedo, 4663, and 4664. So you tell us your first body part. Let's say, for example, your first body part is the left knee, and you have some impairments for the left knee. Let's say you have a loss of range of motion impairment, you have a loss of strength impairment, you have a gait derangement impairment, whatever. You tell us that my impairment rating, tell us first what is the impairment rating. It's 10% whole person impairment due to whatever, and fill in the blank. Let's say here it's abnormal motion. You fill in the impairment, whether it be abnormal motion, gait derangement, loss of strength, etc. Whatever it is, you fill it in here. Then you tell us the approximate percentages of that permanent impairment due to the industrial injury and the approximate percentage due to other factors by first discussing Labor Code 4663. So you tell us, in my opinion and within reasonable medical probability, and this is the exact language as required by Escobedo, in my opinion and within reasonable medical probability, 80% of the permanent impairment is due to the 01/01/19 industrial injury, and 20% is due to other factors. In this case, other factors include, and give us the other factors that are contributing to this 20%. Perhaps the examinee has some pre-existing disability of the knee. Perhaps the examinee has a disability or a pathology or asymptomatic conditions or retroactive prophylactic work restrictions. If so, give us a description of each of these contributors to the current permanent impairment. And then you tell us the reasons, remember Escobedo required reasoning in support of the opinion. So you tell us reasons that substantiate this conclusion include, and then here you give us the reasons. And this is again right out of the Escobedo decision. You predicate your opinion on reasonable medical probability. You provide us with the pertinent facts that contribute to your opinion for your apportionment percentages. You tell us the facts relevant to the above apportionment approximate percentage include, and then here you can list some facts. And here I've given to you some broad categories of facts upon which you can explore in support of your apportionment approximate percentage. Perhaps there's something related to the to the mechanism of injury that contributes to your opinion. Perhaps there's something related to how the examinee has responded to medical treatment that gives you some insight as to the apportionment percentages. Perhaps there's a pre-existing condition. Perhaps, right out of Labor Code 4663, perhaps there's a prior industrial injury to the same body part that has left the examinee vulnerable to re-injury, vulnerable to aggravation. Perhaps there's something here that's contributing to the impairment. You tell us that your apportionment approximate percentages are based on an adequate history, based on an adequate exam, and here you can elaborate on your how and why reasoning as to what are your reasons for your 80% opinion and what are your reasons in support of your 20% opinion. In other words, why is it not 70-30? Why is it not 60-40? Why is it, say for example, 80 and 20? And then finally you tell us that there's no speculation involved in my apportionment approximate percentages. The above opinion on the apportionment approximate percentages is not based on guess, speculation, surmise, or conjecture, and you only put this statement in your argument if you can confirm to yourself that there is no speculation, that there is no guessing. So that handles your apportionment opinion under Labor Code 4663. And then for those examinees who have had a prior permanent disability award, you need to give us your apportionment percentages under 4664, where you tell us about the prior permanent disability award that they received, how much impairment or disability they had, what were their factors of disability at the time, and how your new impairment is related to the prior permanent impairment or prior disability. And you would elaborate on that in this section of your report, only for examinees who have had a prior permanent disability award. Now that handles your impairment, your first impairment for the first body part. If the examinee has a second impairment to that same body part, for example in this case, loss of strength, gait derangement, etc., you then give us the apportionment approximate percentages for the second impairment and for the third impairment, and you repeat this process for any number of impairments for that particular body part. Then for any additional body parts, now here body part number 2, we would repeat that same procedure above, apportioning the permanent impairment between Labor Code 4663 and 4664. And then finally, and this is something that is included in your template, and this is just for your reference, but it's for you to compare your final apportionment argument against the criteria described in Escobedo and confirm to yourself that your opinion is framed in terms of reasonable medical probability, that it's based on pertinent facts, that it must be based on an adequate exam and history, that it sets forth the reasoning in support of its opinions and conclusions, and that it's not in any way speculative or based upon conjecture, surmise, or guess. And in this way, doctors, step by step, methodically, you can simplify, greatly simplify the reporting of your apportionment approximate percentages in a way that qualifies your opinion as substantial medical evidence, and in a way upon which the case can be resolved based upon your specific, exacting, and substantial apportionment approximate percentages. So if you think about it, this is an exact recipe. This is an exact sequence of steps that you can follow that will help you arrive at accurate apportionment approximate percentages. Now what's amazing about this formulation and this sequence of events is that any apportionment approximate percentages that are not accurate, that are made up, that are simply you trying to achieve a particular result, those apportionment approximate percentages will not survive this step-by-step system. Only apportionment approximate percentages that are true, that are accurate, that are correct, that fit the circumstances of the injury and fit the circumstances of the history will survive this substantiating system. Only apportionment approximate percentages that are true and accurate can be based on reasonable medical probability. Only apportionment percentages that are true and accurate will have pertinent facts in support of those approximate percentages. Only apportionment percentages that are true and accurate are based on an adequate exam and history. If there's not adequate and appropriate facts from the history and from the exam to support the percentages, then the percentages cannot be considered substantial. They're not considered true because they're not based on facts from a fabulous exam. They're not based on facts from an accurate history. Only apportionment approximate percentages that are true because they are based on facts from a thorough history and are based on facts from an adequate exam. You see, this is a system. This is a truth filtration system for your apportionment approximate percentages. So if you simply follow the step-by-step sequence that's already established for us in Escobedo and within the language of these particular labor codes, you can paint by the numbers your apportionment approximate percentages and always feel confident in the accuracy of your apportionment approximate percentages. Now, before we conclude today's discussion and this program in its entirety, let's talk about how the Division of Workers' Compensation plans to address and is currently addressing what they consider to be low-quality QME reports. So the process for handling low quality reports is described in two laws. The first is Labor Code 139.2, which talks about our reappointment as a qualified medical evaluator. And it says that if we want to, which means upon request, if we request to be reappointed, the qualified medical evaluator shall be reappointed if he or she meets certain criteria described in Labor Code 139.2, one of which has to deal with our reports. So it says that you shall be reappointed if you have not had more than 5 of his or her evaluations scrutinized and rejected by the courts. So if you have not had 5 or more, you qualify for reappointment. If you have had 5 or more of your reports rejected by the Workers' Compensation Administrative Law Judge or the Appeals Board, then this is cause for the Division of Workers' Compensation to deny your reappointment as a QME because you're simply not capable of writing high-quality reports upon which cases can be resolved. And the whole purpose of hiring you as a qualified medical evaluator is to have you resolve disputed issues through the words within your QME reporting. So one way to eliminate poor quality QMEs is to identify their low quality reports, reject 5 or more of those reports, in which case the qualified medical evaluator can be eliminated from the system through this particular pathway under 139.2. Now, I can tell you, I was at a recent applicant attorney seminar, and there was a judge, a workers' compensation judge on the panel, and the responsibility for identifying these low-quality reports has fallen on the judges. It's the judges that ultimately, at a hearing, use these reports to resolve cases. Well, when the judge stumbles upon a report upon which the case cannot move forward, the judge is required to identify that report, to notify the Division of Workers' Compensation of a low-quality report, and then the process of notifying the qualified medical evaluator of this problem can begin. Well, the judges are already overworked, they're already busy, they're already hurried and harried, and the last thing they need is more tasks on their plate. So this particular judge was telling us in the audience that his procedure is to begin recruiting the attorneys in the case, the applicant attorney and the defense attorney, to help him identify in advance low-quality reports upon which the cases cannot be resolved. So the judges are recruiting helpers to help them identify low-quality reports. So this process of identifying low-quality reports is ramping up, and there's going to be more and more reports singled out from the group that are going to be subject to DWC investigation under this particular code of regulation 106.83. And here 106.83 tells us that where a qualified medical evaluator's report has been considered and rejected pursuant to 139.2, the workers' compensation judge or the appeals board shall make and serve a specific finding on the qualified medical evaluator and the DWC at the time of the decision of the regular workers' compensation issues. So at the time of this particular court hearing where this case is being heard, when the judge or the appeals board encounters a low-quality QME report, they make a specific finding at the time, and they serve that specific finding, the specific deficiency of the report, on both the QME and the DWC. And then that begins the process where the Division of Workers' Compensation then starts to track your particular reports, the QME's particular reports, in determining whether this particular QME, you or me, have 5 or more such report within a two-year period, in which case our reappointment as a qualified medical evaluator can be denied or declined. So you will never land in this pool of reports if you simply follow the suggestions contained within the entirety of this 4-session program. So doctors, I hope this helps you. Throughout the 4 sessions of this program, I've shared with you the most important of the labor codes and the most important of the codes of regulation that govern the production of our QME reports. Now, there are many labor codes and many codes of regulation that describe what we go through as qualified medical evaluators, and I've selected from that large group those that are most important, most relevant to the production of your very next QME report. So if you implement only one suggestion from this entire 4-session program, your reports will get better. If you can incorporate 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe all of the suggestions that I've given you throughout this program, your reports will quickly rise to the top of the pile of the very best reports. And your reputation as a qualified medical evaluator will grow and grow as the parties realize that they can rely on you to resolve cases, to move cases forward, to resolve disputed issues, and to bring these cases to a successful resolution. And you know, that's all anyone in the system actually wants and demands from us as qualified medical evaluators. You'll find, and I've spoken to many applicant attorneys, many defense attorneys, you'll find that the attorneys are less concerned on how you opine, whether you opine in an applicant-oriented manner or a defense-oriented manner. Really what the parties seek is for us as qualified medical evaluators to opine in an accuracy-oriented manner. And you will never create enemies in the system from either the applicant side or the defense's side if you always opine accurately. Our obligation as qualified medical evaluators is to opine accurately. And the purpose of these labor codes and these codes of regulations are to help us arrive at accurate opinions and conclusions upon which the case can successfully be resolved. So I encourage you to adopt and adapt each of these particular numbers, these labor codes and codes of regulation, into your very next report, and watch your reputation as a competent and qualified medical evaluator expand and expand as you start to attract the lion's share of cases that you so rightfully deserve. So doctors, I hope this helps you, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on this program. I hope this program gives you the materials that you need to dramatically and profoundly change the content and quality of your QME reporting. So I want to thank you for your commitment to excellence. I want to thank you for your dedication to continuous learning, and I want to thank you for your personal contribution to improving the integrity of the QME program. For now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.